You finish work, close your laptop, and sit down. You haven't done much. Maybe a few emails, a short meeting, some light reading, but you feel genuinely exhausted, the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes and makes conversation feel like effort. And somewhere in the back of your mind, a quiet voice asks, "Why am I this tired?" That question is worth taking seriously, because the answer is not what most people assume. It is not about laziness. It is not about poor discipline or a weak mindset. The feeling you are describing has a specific origin, and once you understand it, the exhaustion starts to make a different kind of sense. Most people assume that tiredness comes from doing things. You move boxes, you run a meeting, you write a report, you get tired. That is the simple model most of us carry around without questioning it. But there is a version of tiredness that comes not from doing, but from thinking about doing. And it is surprisingly easy to generate and surprisingly hard to recognize. Here is what the experience usually looks like. You have a task. Maybe it is an email you need to write, a form you need to fill out, a conversation you are not looking forward to, a project that has been sitting on your desk for 2 weeks. You do not do it right now, but you do not forget about it either. It lives somewhere in the back of your awareness, surfacing occasionally throughout the day, reminding you it is still there. You think about starting it. You think about what it will involve. You think about how you will feel when it is done. And then you move on to something else. This cycle repeats, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. By the end of the day, the task is still undone, but you are exhausted. And the common explanation most people reach for is that something else wore them out. The other tasks, the meetings, the noise, the screen time, those things are real, but they are not the whole story. The standard narrative around tiredness focuses almost entirely on output. You burned energy, therefore you are tired. But cognitive science has been pointing towards something more complicated for decades. The human brain does not simply rest when the body is resting. It continues processing, monitoring, planning, and managing what researchers sometimes call the cognitive load of unfinished business. The brain is not idle between tasks, it is tracking them. Research into attention and memory suggests that incomplete tasks create a kind of low-level cognitive pressure. When something is unresolved, the mind tends to return to it involuntarily. This is not a character flaw. It appears to be a functional feature of how memory and attention interact. The brain seems to prioritize unfinished things because, at some level, it is still trying to resolve them. The result is that an undone task continues to consume mental resources even when you are not consciously working on it. This matters because mental resources are not unlimited, and they are not free to spend. Attention, working memory, and what researchers call executive function all draw from a shared cognitive capacity. When you spend the day mentally circling a task without completing it, you are spending cognitive resources without producing output. You are paying the cost without receiving the product. And that is precisely why the exhaustion feels confusing. You cannot point to what spent it. Think about a common office scenario. Someone has a difficult conversation they need to have with a colleague. They know it needs to happen. They have been aware of it since Monday. It is now Thursday. In that window, they have rehearsed the conversation in their head multiple times. They have imagined how the other person might respond. They have pre-planned their own reactions. They have considered postponing it, reconsidered, and postponed it again. The actual conversation, when it finally happens, might take 12 minutes, but the mental labor that surrounded it lasted 4 days. Or consider the experience of checking your phone repeatedly for a message you are expecting. The message itself will require 30 seconds to read, but the anticipation, the checking, the low-grade monitoring of whether it has arrived yet, the mild tension of not knowing, all of that runs in the background hour after hour. It is tiring in a way that is hard to explain to someone who has not noticed it. The same pattern appears with tasks on a to-do list that never seem to get started. Each time you glance at the list, each time the unstarted task enters your awareness, there is a small cognitive transaction, not large on its own, but across an entire day, those transactions accumulate. Research into mental fatigue suggests that the sheer frequency of task-related thoughts, not just the difficulty of the tasks themselves, contributes meaningfully to how depleted a person feels by evening. This is the part that many people find quietly uncomfortable, because it means that avoidance is not actually restful. It feels like avoidance should be the easier option, the lower-cost path. And in the short term, it is. Not starting something feels lighter than starting it. But over time, the cost of carrying an unfinished task mentally may exceed the cost of simply doing the task. The thing you are avoiding to preserve your energy may have been slowly spending it the whole time. That is a strange thing to sit with, not because it should make you feel guilty, but because it reframes the question. The exhaustion was not coming from nowhere. It was coming from the continuous low-level act of managing, avoiding, and returning to unresolved things. It is worth being clear about what this does not mean. This is not an argument that people should simply push through and do all the difficult things immediately. That is not how cognitive load works, and it is not a realistic picture of how attention functions across a day. People have genuine limits. Some tasks require energy that is not always available. The point is not that avoidance is a personal failure. The point is that avoidance has a cost that is rarely accounted for, and that cost shows up as tiredness that can feel mysterious or unfair. It also does not mean that every instance of procrastination produces the same outcome. Some tasks sit in the background without creating much friction. Others seem to generate a disproportionate amount of mental noise relative to their actual size. The difference often has more to do with emotional weight than task complexity. Something that feels high stakes, uncertain, or socially loaded tends to generate more involuntary revisiting, and therefore more cognitive cost, than something that is simply long or complicated. Understanding this does not necessarily make the tiredness go away, but it does change what the tiredness is telling you. It is not evidence that you are weak or unfocused, or that something is wrong with your capacity for work. It is a signal that your attention has been occupied, even if your hands have been still. The experience of carrying tasks mentally is one of the more invisible forms of daily effort. It does not show up in any record of what you accomplished. It does not appear in a meeting summary or a project log. It simply lives in the background of your day, running quietly, spending something real, and making you wonder at the end of the evening why you feel so tired from a day that does not look very heavy from the outside. That feeling, quiet and hard to explain, is one of the most honest things the mind produces. It is not confusion, it is the brain accurately reporting what it has been doing all along.